The 39th Squadron's first contact with the Japanese was on May 18, 1942. For the pilots of the 39th, the P-39 Air Cobra turned out to be a disappointment. Lieutenant Akins recalls,
"Could have done better with a truck. It's more maneuverable and will go higher."
The pilots of the 39th all wanted a plane that could effectively match the Japanese Zero, but sadly, the P-39 was not that aircraft. The 39th continued using the P-39 throughout their first tour of duty, fighting with enthusiasm, if not with ease. They spent the first several months of combat being harried by the superior Zero, yet in spite of their limitations, they held their own against their enemy. In June, the 39th relieved the 35th Fighter Squadron, and several of the pilots, such as Curran Jack Jones, received their baptism by fire during a mission escorting a flight of B-17 bombers on their way back to base. Despite their disadvantages, the 39th emerged victorious, claiming 5 zeros and Japanese ace Satoshi Yoshino. The squadron suffered its worst defeat on July 4, 1942, after a Japanese ambush. The squadron made it back to base, but 3 of their planes were shot down and most took heavy damage, while not a single Allied victory was scored. On July 25th, the 39th flew their last mission using the P-39 Air Cobra before leaving New Guinea for some time to recuperate from the psychological pressures of battle. As a whole, the group was optimistic and eager to return to combat, hopefully with a more capable aircraft. By October, the 39th Squadron returned to the front lines, becoming the first P-38 unit in the Pacific. The P-38 was a much more versatile aircraft than the P-39, and with its twin props, it could achieve a speed of 400 miles per hour, faster than anything else in the sky. In addition to speed, the P-38 had devastating firepower, delivered via 4 machine guns and one 20-millimeter cannon placed in the nose. It was just after receiving the new P-38s that Bob Farrow scored the first victory in the Pacific theater of war, knocking a Zero out of the sky with one of his bombs. On December 27th, the 39th had a major victory over the Bunagona area, claiming 7 Zeros, 2 Oscars, and 2 Vals, while only one P-38 received serious damage. Between May 1942 and January 1943, Tom Lynch had become one of the top aces in the Southwest Pacific, scoring 8 victories, and by February, the 39th had become the highest-scoring squadron in the 5th Air Force. March of 1943, however, marked a dark time for the 39th, as during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, 3 pilots, including Captain Bob Farrow, were lost alongside a B-17 bomber. In the summer of 1943, the 39th fought along the coast of New Guinea, and Tom Lynch took over as commander. July began the next period of sustained air victories for the 39th, and with 11 more victories on July 21st, the squadron total increased to 104, a new record for the 5th Air Force. By August, the 39th had been based at Port Moresby for over 8 months, and some of the pleasures of rear area life were beginning to appear. A new mess hall, new recreation building, and regular showings of movies on base made the usually rugged 5th Air Force Base look more like civilization. Maintaining an edge in combat was mostly psychological for the pilots. They truly believed in themselves and in their aircraft. In combat, they were now on the offensive, and their enemies seemed to know it. There remained many experienced pilots in the Japanese Air Force, However, many of the Japanese aces had fallen in combat and were being replaced by less experienced, less aggressive recruits. Losses for the 39th were amazingly light considering the number of dangerous missions they had flown since operations began in May of 1942. About 1 in 7 pilots were lost, while the squadron had claimed 113 victories. The 39th continued combat operations and by November of 1943 was involved in one of the largest pushes made by the 5th Air Command during the war. Throughout 1943, Rabaul had been a major staging point for the Japanese against Allied forces. By November, however, after months of fighting, the Japanese had been pushed back to Rabaul. The Allied forces launched a massive attack on Rabaul, and over a 2-day period, 50 Japanese fighters fell to the P-38 bomber escorts alone. By the end of December, Rabaul finally fell to Allied pressure, with Navy and Marine forces taking over the base. At the end of the operation, many of the more experienced pilots in the 39th were sent home on leave. At the same time, the 39th was transitioning from the P-38 to the P-47. The pilots of the 39th dutifully accepted this switch to the P-47, knowing that its limited range would mean less aerial combat for them for the duration of the war. The squadron ended its whirlwind year and entered a period of service providing sweep and cover operations, while other units still flying the P-38 surpassed the 39th. The glory days were over for the 39th, but the squadron performed the role of workhorse with equal devotion, flying support missions all over the South Pacific. In October of 1944, the squadron's main task was one of supporting bombers against the Japanese. The stage was set for the last period of aerial combat in the war for the 5th Air Force. In March of 1945, the 39th traded out the now trusty P-47s for the newer P-51 Mustangs. At first, some of the more experienced pilots missed the dependability of the P-47s. However, with growing anticipation of an Allied invasion of the Japanese homeland, the Mustangs were considered the more capable airplane. In June, the 39th moved into Japanese territory on the island of Ishima, just off the coast of Okinawa. Ishima was the squadron's final station during the war. The 39th was one of the first American fighter squadrons to enter combat in World War II. They fought valiantly with the P-39 Air Cobras, introduced the P-38 to the Pacific, and relentlessly hammered the Japanese with the P-47. Finally, they carried the fight to the enemy's front door with the P-51 Mustang. Yet despite all of this, the 39th's real glory lies in the spirit of its members and its willingness and ability to take the fight to the enemy no matter what the circumstance or conflict. They will be remembered forever.